So I want to start this video talking about these natural laws of sex and give you a little bit of background, a little context so you understand where I'm coming from. And none of us like to be told what to do, right? None of us like to be told what we should eat or not eat or how we use our body, and especially in terms of sex. Like, no one wants to be told what to do. And my intention in this is to not tell you what to do, but simply share some information, share some ideas, and then let you experience for yourself. I really believe that life is the teacher. I've had this opportunity over the last 10 plus years of coaching people to have discussions that the general public just doesn't have. And a lot of these discussions have ended up at different times talking about sex and people's experiences in this area. And it's this, sex is this thing that can, on one hand, it can create. It can be the most amazing creation. On the other hand, it can be the most devastating destruction. And there's just unspeakable things that I've helped people process in this place. And so there's this massive spectrum of what sex can be in our world. And I want to talk about some of the natural laws. So, I've been sitting here I've actually been preparing this for quite some time. And this particular conversation, I've really looked at, okay, take out society's context and people's opinions and all the different pieces around it, and just look at nature and what nature has said about sex throughout the existence of our species, of human beings. And if you think about this, we go back 100 years or 1,000 years or 5,000 years, or whatever you want to, however far you want to go back. And the strongest tribes had certain rules about sex. Women historically have always had to be very, very selective about who they mated with. They needed to choose a mate who exhibited enough patience that he would stick around and provide after a child was born, because sex usually led to children. And so women had to be really selective, and the women that were selective in who they chose were the ones who passed on their genes. Infant mortality rate historically was about 50%. It means that half the kids never got past the age of 5. 25% of the women died during childbirth. So those that passed their genes on were likely those that chose a good mate, that stuck around, and that helped the woman survive when she couldn't provide for herself during those fragile moments at the end of the pregnancy, the beginning of the birth, and she didn't have the capacity to go out and gather and hunt and do all those things. And so the women, they needed to pick a guy that exhibited that kind of patience. Some people think that female orgasmic response, the reason that you read some of these surveys and up to half of the women comment in these anonymous surveys that they don't experience orgasm during sex. And anthropologists and people that study the people that are a lot smarter than me, I just read what they write. They suggest that orgasm was a sign to a woman that this man had enough patience. If during before they had had intercourse, if the man had enough patience to bring her to climax, this was nature's signal to say, this man exhibits patience and he would be a good mate and he'll provide for the offspring and your genes will be passed on. So there's all these things that are around this. So women have historically had to be very selective. And men, from the time they're like 12 years old, have an instinct to mate as often as possible with as many women as possible before it's too late. And whatever too late is, I don't know, but there's this instinct in them. And so tribal leaders knew this, right? They understood that these men, and I'm not saying women don't have a sex drive, but women were the ones that had to be selective in nature. So the tribal leaders would see these young men, they wanted to come out, they wanted to mate, this is what they were interested in, and so they needed to set some parameters. Because if the young men went and mated with all of the young women in the tribe, and all these young women had babies, and there was a whole bunch of unwed mothers raising babies that were unable to go out and provide for themselves, it would eliminate that tribe in a generation. It would be a disaster. And look, we're trying this experiment nowadays. Society's different, obviously. Women have the ability to provide for themselves and these different things, but we're attempting this tribal experiment, within the modern society of seeing if we can bend and change and eliminate the rules around sex that have been there. But what happened in the tribe is that the tribal leaders would say, okay, we know you want to go and mate. That's fantastic. It's a wonderful thing. You're going to love it. And we're going to set some parameters around this. In order to be able to have the right to access sex, they would cause the men to go through growth exercises and rites of passage. I was in Kenya helping to build a school, and we went out on safari, and we went and visited the Masai Mara. And this is where they make all these National Geographic videos. And we went to a Maasai camp. Now these people live out in the middle of lion country, and they make this big enclosure of these really pokey sticks. And they circle their camp with these pokey sticks, and they herd all their cows into the middle. And I asked these people, I said, how often do the lions attack your camp at night? And they said, oh, about 4 times a week. So 4 times a week, these people have lions trying to bust in the walls of their camp to eat their cows and to eat them. And this is where they live. Like, this is their life. And they haven't evolved that much, except they now have cell phones, and I'm Facebook friends with them, which is really weird. But anyway, we're out there in the middle of nothing. And these young men, in order to take a wife, they have to kill a lion. Now, I'm not having a conversation here about animal rights and all that kind of stuff. You go live with lions and tell them that they should stop killing the lions that are trying to attack them and all that stuff. My point is this: these young men, in order to access sex, had to exhibit this bravery and this strength, and they had to go through this test. And what that test did historically is it helped them develop the skills of being a good hunter and a good protector and a good provider, and it gave them status in the tribe. And the status in the tribe was incredibly important. It was their whole world, their whole story, right? And so all of that was revolved around sex. So if they can go through whatever the rite of passage is, then they're granted the opportunity to take a wife and to have sex. And then when that child comes, they become responsible for that child. And that man went from feeding 1 mouth to feeding 3. Sex has always meant growth and responsibility historically. It meant growth for the woman. She suddenly had to care and nurture for this other person and not just herself. It meant growth for the man. And if the man wanted more sex, it meant more babies, which meant he had to innovate. He had to grow up. He had to become more resourceful, because now he had to feed more and more and more mouths. And it was all around this aspect of sex. It was a big deal, this tribal stuff. So I was in this Maasai camp, and there's this young guy there, and he has this hat on it. It looks kind of like a pirate's hat. He had crafted this hat out of a lion's mane, and on his leg he had these massive scars, these rake wounds from when the lion had reached out and raked him as he was spearing it. And I was, I sometimes like to make jokes. I sometimes like to say little things here and there. And my joke was clearly misinterpreted as a challenge of his manhood. And this little guy, he looked about 15 years old. I made my little joke about a nice hat or whatever. Then he whipped out his sword and he stuck it right against my throat. And I could feel that razor sharp edge. I thought I was going to bleed because it was like sharp, almost hot. And he stared me in the eye. He was so close I could smell him. And I don't think he'd ever bathed. I could really smell him. And he looked me in the eye, and I knew in this moment, this guy, that he would kill me. And I've obviously worked on my stories, and I don't have any story that says I need to be more of a man than this little man with a sword. And so I just said, look, dude, man, I was joking around. He took his sword down and did this. But this was serious business historically, and it all revolved around sex. So the other part of natural law that I want to talk about are the chemicals we experience during sex. And I talked about this, the adrenaline and the serotonin and the dopamine. There's other chemicals like oxytocin that we experience. So let me explain what this does in the body. Everybody knows adrenaline, right? We know how to go experience adrenaline. It's this peak state that we experience. And so, caveman, he went out and he goes down by the river and he sees cave woman bathing by the river, and he has this rush of adrenaline that happens. He's like, wow, I like that. I want to check that out, right? That's that initial experience of a relationship, which is totally natural. It's nature's way to wake us up and get us to pay attention and get us interested. And then he would have to start to prove to her that he would be a good provider. She'd put him through a series of tests in order to show that he would be a good provider, and then ultimately they would mate, right? They'd come in this place and they would have intercourse, and in that experience, in the orgasm process, he would experience the chemicals of dopamine and serotonin. Serotonin, well, and she would too, if there was climax. Serotonin is the chemical that makes us feel loved. When we eat chocolate, it releases serotonin in our brain. It gives us that little warm feeling. That's why we like chocolate, right? It releases these brain chemicals. Dopamine is almost a trance-like euphoric experience. When we listen to music and we can relax, that's a dopamine response. That's why we like music. They've done brain studies on this. And so with sex, we could go and experience this cocktail of an up of adrenaline and a downer of dopamine and this warm feeling in the middle of serotonin. And it was like taking an upper and a tranquilizer all at the same time in this fabulous experience of physical connection and bonding with this other person. The other chemical that is prevalent in sex is oxytocin, which is the bonding chemical. When we experience oxytocin, our brain bonds with whatever that situation was. So in nature, if you think about this, it's perfect. It's the perfect way to cause our species to survive. This intensity at the beginning, this excitement, this draw, this attraction, this euphoric experience, this incredible feeling of love and physical connection and pleasure, and this bonding in the brain where our brain gets anchored to that person as the source of that experience. And so then when we're apart from each other and everything slows down, then our brain goes, I want some more of that good feeling. I want some more of those brain chemicals that are 100 times stronger than heroin. Where did I get those? And it searches our brain and we're bonded to that person and it goes, boom, I want to be with that person. I want to go back. I want to connect. I want that experience again. And we come back and we do that again and again and again. And what happens is that creates the bond so that when baby shows up, the guy sticks around. And then in nature, when a woman's nursing, often she can't get pregnant. And so the sex continues, this cycle of creating this connection and this bond, which holds the family unit together, which causes the tribal unit to be strong and causes the next generation to be raised up, taking on responsibility and being willing to take on growth. That's what sex has always meant historically. Now, something happened in the 1960s, right around the time that fast food hit the market, right? We talked about sweet and salt and fat as far as tastes and flavors. Well, in the 1960s, the birth control pill was approved in the US. And so suddenly, for the first time in history, women didn't have to be selective from a pregnancy standpoint. We found out later this is the funny thing. The perception was we didn't have to be selective. There's a lot of people that know that birth control doesn't always prevent pregnancy, right? That's a conversation for another time, but we essentially, as a society, suspended the natural laws that had governed sex for all of the history of humanity. And we said, oh no, it's free now. It's all free. Just do whatever you want. And so we went into this place. And again, look, I want to say this stuff not coming from a place of judgment, but from a place of observation, of going, okay, cool. What are the natural law fruits of this behavior and this choice? We take a look in society at what happened. When women changed, historically, they've always had to be selective. And then that changed. And women quit being as selective about who they mated with. Not all women, but a lot of women did. What did it do for men? Suddenly men didn't have to jump through the same hoops. A guy could be a lazy bum. And because women lowered the bar of sex, the guy didn't have to actually grow and grow up. The other interesting thing that's happened is that men no longer have to go through this cycle of responsibility and growth and status in the tribe in order to access sex. And so we've suspended these natural laws. Now, I don't know about you, but I take a look at my own life. And, my instinct is to say, I want to eat whatever I want. I want to eat sweet and salt and fat as often as I want to, whenever I want to, however I want to. And I have the same instinct with sex. It's like, oh, well, I want to just, express my sexuality however I want to. But take a look at this for yourself. I know with myself, when I have expressed this in a way that I really wasn't intending to bond with another person, I was essentially using the other person for self-gratification, that I was left hollow afterwards. It's just disappointing and it just didn't feel very good. I had this opportunities to spend some time with a guy. He was a founder of a major restaurant chain. I know he was worth way over $100 million because we talked about some of his assets. And he had stories of hanging out with presidents of countries and kings and traveling on private jets. I mean, this guy had lived it up. Had married 6 times, which didn't sound like it was going too well for him. He was kind of on the tail end of his 6th marriage. And this guy had more stories of sex than anybody I had ever heard. And it was interesting because when all the other guys around, people were sharing stories, and he's talking about all these experiences that he's had of sex. And when everybody was gone and it was just me and him, he looked at me. And I'll never forget this moment because he just goes, you know, I've been disappointed with sex my entire life. And I thought about this. What was it that wasn't fulfilling and nurturing for him? And this is where my opinion is. I come in and I look at it, I go, what of these natural laws are self-evident? If we go back pre-1960, it was clear, it was self-evident that sex meant growth, and that if we engaged in sex to be fully in alignment with the natural laws, we should be willing to make a lifelong commitment to the human being that could result from that sex. And the other part is the bonding, the oxytocin. And do we really fully intend to bond with this person? Because I think what happens, this is just my opinion on this, but when we have the bonding experience with someone we don't want to bond with, and then we withdraw from that person, it leaves us feeling empty and hollow. And then you have the whole internet experience of, where we end up essentially bonding with images or bonding with our computer, and it's just not a deeply fulfilling experience. So I want you to see for yourself. Think about how you've taken this energy, how you've taken this power and this drive that's we all have it. It's what keeps life alive. It's life calling out to life. How have you expressed it in your life? How have you used it? And what has the result been? Because as we start to examine this and take a look at it and see if we can align ourselves with the natural laws, I believe that we can experience higher and higher levels of satisfaction and connection. We can actually get the thing that we really want if we live in alignment with these natural laws. If this is something in your life that you might need some help aligning, if you're experiencing the symptoms of exhaustion and being out of control, being driven by your sex drive, I've created a little cheat guide here for you that teaches you how to align your life with the natural laws of sex so that you can experience greater financial abundance and more connected relationships and the freedom to live your purpose. All you got to do is click on the button on this page, and it will take you to another page where you can get access to this guide and help you start to live in alignment with the 7 irrefutable laws of power.